My name is Angelica Mercado-Ford, and this is my Educational Theorist Final for EDU 506, Applying Intersectionality to Education via Black Feminist Thought via the teachings of Dr. Patricia Hill Collins. Professor Collins is a social theorist whose research and scholarship have examined issues of race, gender, social class, sexuality, and nation. She is a distinguished university professor of sociology at the University of Maryland, College Park. Collins graduated from Brandeis University in 1965, receiving her Bachelor of Arts degree in sociology. She earned a Master of Arts degree in teaching and social science education from Harvard University in 1970, and finally she completed her doctorate in sociology back at Brandeis in 1984. Patricia Hill Collins was born on May 1, 1948, in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Her parents were Albert Hill, a factory worker and Second World War veteran, and Eunice St. Randolph Hill, a secretary. Collins attended the Philadelphia public schools, and even at a young age, Collins had the realization of her lived reality. She attended a school that catered to mostly white middle-class students that was in a predominantly black neighborhood. She attended Frederick Douglass Elementary School and later Philadelphia High School for Girls, also known as Girls High, which was founded in 1848 as the nation's first public high school for women only. Collins had the unique experience of attending Girls High during the 1960s process of desegregation of schools, which contributed to her growing interest in sociology, feminism, and activism for African American and civil rights. These are the things that she is currently focusing on in her research. 1. The epistemology of intersectionality, specifically analyzing how race, class, gender, sexuality, ethnicity, nation, and/or age mutually construct one another as systems of power and as theoretical constructs. 2. Exploring epistemologies of emancipatory knowledge, for example, critical race theory, nationalism, and feminism. And 3. Examining how African American female and male youth's experiences with social issues of education, unemployment, popular culture, and political activism articulate with global phenomena, specifically complex social inequalities, global capitalist development, transnationalism, and political activism. Some of her influences include Audre Lorde, Angela Davis, Alice Walker, Pauli Murray, all who have contributed to African American theory as well as activism, both in the past and in current works. Audre Lorde once said, "Each of us is called upon to take a stand, so in these days ahead, as we examine ourselves and each other, our works, our fears, our differences, our sisterhood and survivals, I urge you to tackle what is most difficult for us all, self-scrutiny of our complacencies, the idea that since each of us believes she is on the side of right, she need not examine her position." After Collins read this quote, she responded saying, "I urge you to examine your position," and so she encouraged readers to take a stand as well. Now, Collins has a theory called learning from the outsider within, the sociological significance of Black feminist thought. And in this particular reading, it says, "Living as we did, on the edge, we developed a particular way of seeing reality. We looked both from the outside and in from the inside out. We understood both." And this is a quote from Bell Hooks. And this is particularly referencing African American women, their history, dating back to slavery, and the way that they had an inside view of the way that the workings of white families and how this specific perspective, which we now call lived experience, plays a role in how women, specifically Black women, are viewed today. These are some themes that she discusses. First is the self-definition versus self-valuation. Here she talks about how Black women define themselves based on the way that society portrays them, such as calling them the Black matriarch, for example, and basically criticizing the way that Black women take a stance for themselves, particularly going against the white patriarchal norms. So anytime that Black women do this, they're seen as crazy, illogical, sassy, loud-spoken, and these things particularly make Black girls see themselves this way, and this is the way that they then react and act as are expected, versus self-valuation, which she pushes as a way to essentially get out of that oppressive viewpoint and value yourself and love yourself and see yourself for the things that you want to see yourself as. And we'll talk a little bit about this later, but The next one talks about interlocking nature of oppression, and essentially what this is talking about is that Black women are at the very, very top of the oppression pyramid, if so to speak, because even during the civil rights movement, Black men were seen as someone to protect, but Black women were not really protected or seen as something to defend. And so even when comparing them to Black women, there's an excerpt in this particular reading that talks about how the Black woman saw herself as the mule who was used and abused, and the white woman, even though she was oppressed, she was seen as the dog, and she was still taken care of as a pet. So there's a lot to examine there. The last one is the importance of Afro-American women's culture. And then what really this is talking about is just how Black women essentially took their oppression and their suffering and turned it into something creative where they can essentially get out of that oppression. And this is via literature, poetry, music, etc. Now, how does this apply to the classroom? So with that framing in mind, let's take a look. Collins talks about in her book about race here, and it says, in the current seemingly colorblind context where the next generation of Americans is increasingly of color, the United States must find a way to build a democratic national community with an increasingly heterogeneous population, as opposed to homogeneous, rather than equating excellence with elitism, the posture that encourages keeping people out. We might define excellence at being compatible with diversity. Second is schools or democratic responsibilities. Teachers' performance is vitally important, and some of those duties include going above and beyond simply delivering job skills or acting as simple conduits for information. Rather, teachers are frontline actors negotiating the social issues of our time. Teachers are the ones whom Black and brown youth turn to for guidance for upward social mobility. Teachers can be facilitators or gatekeepers of fundamental democratic ideals. And lastly, media. If you define public education as public institutions teaching us about our place in the world, schools are by no means the only institution educating young people in the broader public. Whether we like it or not, for youth, the media provides an education that often contradicts the supplements school-based learning. New technologies are the currency of youth, and a critical education requires a media literacy that prepares youth to be critical consumers of media as well as cultural creators. Now, how does this apply to my classroom in the future? What I learned from Dr. Collins is to remember that the importance of lived experience when working with classrooms that are diverse. We as educators cannot remove past oppressions that hold back and limit students, but we can be there as facilitators to ensure that while in our classroom, children are given the resources and attention they need to succeed. Second, I really like the idea of self-definition versus self-validation, and I see that it can be measured across the cultural spectrum, so I will really, really use this in the classroom, because I think that all children, specifically Black and children of color, should really see themselves as valuable. And so the way I will do this is by actively listening, offering validation to children, especially when they look different and are looking for a sense of belonging, and focusing on activism and advocacy work when necessary to further propel students into success. Criticism of theory I found featuring Beyonce, which talks about her music as a way for her to find herself as a Black woman, and particularly this talks about the latest album Lemonade and her music, which talks about Black identity and also kind of finding beauty in in traditional standards and getting out of those traditional standards. For example, Beyonce sings, "He only want me when I'm not there. He better call Becky with the good hair." So this is an example of how Beyonce sees her Black feminist activism through unconventional methods. Through her music and music videos, she has sparked international discussion of issues facing Black women. Simply put, Black feminist epistemology is radically unique. Hayne goes on to explain that Black feminism values lived experience as opposed to a worldview which is predicated on positivism. And this is the idea that essentially pull yourself up from your bootstraps, that you can make it in this world. But what it really fails to address is the lived experience and the oppression and the things that people of color and Black people have to experience in the world. Thus, we are not in the same playing field, essentially. So, this Black feminist thought is really looking into this and taking those experiences as something valuable to learn from. And so Hayne argues that Beyonce explores the unique standpoint of Black women with experiences varying degrees of race, gender, and class identities. And she argues that notably Collins' emphasis is on experiences that reject positive notions, that truth is exclusively derived from knowledge. So, like I was saying, knowledge isn't the only way we gain truth. Lived experiences are very important. And going back to the way that Black women and essentially people of color have experienced depression, lived experiences should definitely play a role.
Because to be brave, you are confronting something that scares you, or something that's difficult, or something that's hard. And very often when we are brave, we are taking on things that are wrong, but society tells us they're right. It's brave to confront racism, even though society may say racism is okay. It's brave to confront sexism, even when society says sexism is okay. Women don't mind being on the bottom. They like it that way. It's brave to confront poverty, which we mask under this lovely term, income inequality, as if it's just an accident, you see. So the notion of being brave is hard. It's individual and it is collective.
So really, at the end of this all, I really want to challenge everybody to take a look at the diversity in their classroom and really what they can do to pay attention to those lived experiences, and instead of getting frustrated with the performance of a student, or rather underperformance of a student, really think about what they've gone through and see how that plays a role in their education or where they're at. And lastly, to value and appreciate and respect the dignity of all students, because this is really where students will find that confidence. And as educators, that is our role, to push students forward and to put them into a place where they feel like they have an equal playing field and can actually succeed. And that is our job.